Hi guys, welcome to White Paper Lecture 3. This is the third in our series of focusing on the white paper itself. This particular one will focus on testing, methods, results, discussions, and conclusions. So let's go down here a little bit. I'll talk to you about different expectations for different parts of engineering, depending on where you're at, whether you're primary or secondary in these components. So the first thing we want to talk about is what we call IMRAD, I-M-R-A-D. This is kind of a standard for scientific papers. You'll see it kind of all over the place. You'll see it in publications from IEEE. You'll see it in academic journals, scientific fields. You'll see it in NASA. So this is kind of an acronym that you'll see frequently, or at least you should follow frequently. And IMRAD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. The and's a little bit of a joke, engineering joke. All right, so let's take a look at the path that you will follow. All of your papers probably will be following this particular type of path in some way or another. You'll have to tweak it a little bit depending on what your widget is or what your research is. So in your introduction, this will be the first thing that you write. It'll talk about why was your study undertaken, what was your research question, what was your tested hypothesis or purpose. There's more to this that you might find depending on the topic to the course that you particularly are focusing on. And later on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about types of things that could go in an introduction. Sometimes you'll roll up different areas or different components into the introduction depending on what you're focusing on. Methods. So I stands for introduction, M stands for methods. When, where, how was the study done, what materials were used, who was included in your study groups, for instance. So what were the methods in which you used to proceed with your research? Okay, so the IMR is results. What answer did you find? When you did the testing, what did you find? Did you find that the hypothesis you had back at the beginning, was it true? I mean, with luck, you found that this was true, and sometimes you didn't, right? So this is your results. What answers? The and is a joke, of course, just to help you remember IMRAD. But the last section that's really important here is discussion. So this is how you might end a paper. Sometimes in the past you might have thought of it as a conclusion. But here we're going to end with a discussion. What might the answer infer? You got an answer. What does it mean, right? How does it fit in with what, say, other researchers in that particular field or on that particular widget have found? Are there perspectives for future researching in this area? And that could apply also to future students, like similar to yourself. I often see similar projects that come through the pipeline. So this could be information that's useful to them as well, like it might have been for you. So I call this also the section that's really important, the so what section, right? So when you're reading something and you have that question in your head, like, so what, right? So this is the question where you have to answer that question, so what? What's important? Why does it matter? By the way, at this particular point in the semester, you might not actually care. You might be actually asking yourself, so what? Why am I doing this? I don't care. Yeah, that happens sometimes in research too. You have to just suck it up and pretend that you care and explain it to us. That's important too. In a humanities field, you might see some of you are English majors out there, so this might apply to you. You might be doing secondary research. You might also have created what is the type of research that you're doing. It might be called a review of the literature sometimes, if you're in the humanities field. Sometimes that's located in a different place in a research paper, but in the white paper lecture, you might be giving us some context, right? What are the perspective, what's going in the future, right? Maybe even what were you not able to cover in this particular focus that you had looking forward. Okay, let's take a look at how IMRAD might apply to what's expected if you happen to be in the ICET or CPET senior design sections. Okay, We'll focus on a few of you at a time, but here's where those might fit. So this, you've probably seen this before, chapters 1 through 7. This is something that is usually focused on in your other class. This is where they fit. The I, introduction, that's easy. The M, the methods, that's kind of chapter 2, system designs, overview, and research. The R in your field, ICET, engineering, electric, I've kind of put the R results in chapter 3, 4, and 5. Here we have hardware design, software design, unit testing, and system integrations, if applicable, of course, to whatever you're creating. And the D, which is the discussions, that's usually chapter 6 and 7, project management, and the conclusions that you've found. Also in the discussion and the conclusions, that's where you're probably going to find, or the project management is where you're going to find your Gantt chart. How did you make this work? How did you organize your group, your partnership? Who did you work with? How did you do it? What lessons did you learn, right? Okay. So this kind of fits in the schematic here of how this might work. The R, these middle chapters, that's kind of your nitty-gritty there. The details of how you took apart and explained the thing that you created. Okay, now if you are in MET or IET, senior design, you have a similar look, but it's going to look a little bit different. Your components are called something slightly different. We have the I, the introduction, is also called introduction. The methods, you might call it a design overview, right? The R, in this case, the results, your features and components, your construction, your function, your testing. Those, again, are the nitty-gritty of what you are putting together. It's similar to the electrical field, but a little bit different in how we discuss them. They still fit into that same overview of MRAD or IMRAD. Okay. You might have discussions, then we're going to call those your budget and your conclusions and recommendations. Remember all these sections, the conclusions and recommendations for everybody, those are going to feel a little more conversational, a little less weighty than some of these middle parts that have a lot of, numbers and details and charts and graphs and pictures. Okay, I should see a lot of stuff there. Okay, so what about the rest of you? Everybody. Now this includes all of you. Everybody, including the 2 sections I just talked about. What's included in the white paper lecture? Now, if you haven't taken a look at those components for quite a while, I encourage you to pull those back up and take a look at them. But these are them, real quick and dirty. So we're going to have an abstract or an executive summary. We talked about that last time. The methods here. Right, so introduction, background, that sort of thing. You may have some or all of those components. Some of those may be rolled together. We've talked about that, depending on how you approach it. The methods is going to be your solution or explanation of your research process. Now, keep in mind that methods is about the study as a whole here. That's what we're talking about. It's not about the specific testing. We're going to get to that in a second here. This discusses how and why the study was conducted and what was the systematic way in which you collected the data. Okay, how did you do that? What choices did you make? What tests did you perform? Why did you do them? If you're doing secondary research, then explain how you were compiling your research on a particular technical subject or thing. What was included? What was not included? What did you exclude and why? These are important things for the person who's reading your white paper to read. And remember, your audience here is a wide audience. It's not somebody who has the same research as yourself. So keep in mind that you're explaining these things in detail, and we want to know exactly how you came about, what you came about. Think back to that research proposal that you made far long ago. It feels like a long ago. What did you follow, or what did you make changes from? This is important for us to know in the methods section, right? Or solution or explanation of your research process. Okay. Okay, so then we're going to move along to the end of that. All of you are going to have an explanation and discussion of data, an explanation and discussion of findings, and conclusions and recommendations for future research. Those of you in engineering, you need to describe, back here in this methods section, the tests that you performed, the validity of the tests that you performed, not the results. The results are later, okay? But first you're going to explain, so let's suppose you did a stress test on, to measure whether the metal you chose was, could withstand a certain amount of stress. That's important. You probably chose that one because, there's some industry standards, and you want to explain that to us. These are the industry standards. This is why. This is why we did this. You want to remember the scientific reproducibility. Yeah, that's important. Somebody else needs to be able to take your results and reproduce them exactly the way that you explain. So you have to explain how you did it, what were the conditions, all of the important details so that somebody could do that. That's important that we figure this out in the methods section. Okay, that's scientific writing, right? All right, so let's go down here a little bit. All right, so here's where I'm a little behind. Let's catch up. All right, so on the testing parts, here is your section that's going to be all about the numbers, right? For those of you who are doing secondary research, you might even skip this section because you aren't going to have any numbers, and I'll expect that because you'll have longer sections in other ways. For those of you who are doing actual sets of tests on the item, you have to explain, this is where you report what you found. Here's where we find numbers, giant graphs, charts. It's very data heavy and explains all those statistics, and they're drawn out. You explain them for various purposes because other audience members reading it might want them for different things. They might be different types of stakeholders. So you have to explain your testing methods. Results. Here's where you're going to come up with here's where you interpret the numbers that you just reported. Sometimes you'll find that some of these sections might get lumped together depending on how you did the research or how you're reporting the results. That's okay. But what's important is that you do a very thorough job. This particular section of the paper is not as concise perhaps as others. This is where you're thorough. You might even feel like you're repeating yourself, but you have to be very thorough in explaining your results. Let's, again, think back. Suppose you had some sort of widget that you created and you did that stress test and you got a whole bunch of data and you put it together in a chart. Well, to some of your members of your audience, remember you've got a lot of different audience stakeholders. We've got shareholders, bosses, marketing people, professors, all kinds of people who may not have any clue what your chart of numbers means. It might just look like a bunch of garbage to them, right? So you have to explain in this results section, what do the numbers mean? You can't just lay them out in a giant graph and say, here they are. You have to explain what they mean. So it doesn't feel like it's meaningless to somebody like a marketing manager who picks it up and goes, I have no idea what to do with this, right? A big problem is when you have the assumption that you just put all those numbers down and you show what you did and that's enough. It is not enough. In this section you have to explain what the graphic is about that you're showing. Why is it there? What is it doing? Okay. Conclusions. Finally, this is the job. Oftentimes when we have a conclusion, if you remember your English professors, myself included, you might have written a conclusion. This is a summary of the entire document. I hate a summary of the entire document. I just read your entire document. I don't need for you to tell me again. Okay. But it's one of the possibilities, and it might actually work given some circumstances. But here's where you can give final recommendations. I found this out. This is the stuff that I found. These are my results. Hey, that we might have some implications here for further research. What kinds of things do you recommend? What did you see? What did you infer from what you found? That's far more important. What's the upshot of what you learned? Why did you learn it? Again, remember that your reader wants to know, so what? So you have to explain that. So what? I read all your stuff. I saw that you did it. So what? Okay, so the hardest thing to do as an engineer who wants to focus on numbers, probably, who wants to focus on these things, is to kind of take all the numbers and things out of your head and explain it to somebody who isn't an engineer and make it easy for them to understand. Okay, so that's a little bit more in depth of white paper lecture number 3. I will see some of you coming up here in a second meeting. That meeting, again, is optional. If you need it, please make sure that you contact me either via, you can book me, or we can make a phone conversation. So I hope to hear from you fairly soon, and don't give up. This is the hardest part of the semester, but you're almost there.